to try to change their direction. I mean, prayer works well. Prayer in numbers works well. We know that with intention. But I mean, honestly, it's the it, these people rule for a reason because they're sociopaths and they don't care about us. So like, if you want to, you got to tell them, you got to like lead them with death. You got to lead them with a death plan in order for them to change, and then switch the death plan last minute to a life plan.
I think Dusty is pointing to a more positive realm. It's like the 400 families, only 200 of them are on the dark side, you should say, and we can mobilize the other side that says, oh yeah, we can make this change, and we can force the other half because they really don't have any power other than what we give them. Thank you. Given the Irish solution, yes.
Some may not have been on the call earlier. We talked about a moneyless society.
Joke on the show. So.
Oh, is it? Good, good. Because I'm not a capitalist.
Aerosmith,
I'm
eat
Irish,
the rich.
so I know about it.
There must be a Dusty here.
I thought Dusty was it Mitchell? Michael?
Oh, yes, Dusty Mitchell. It's Michael McDuffie, so I go by Duffy. My drag name is Dusty Mitchell, so that's weird. Good to be here. Neil, for the record, Robert has requested that we refer to him as Bob.
It's just, that's what people call me. It's just easier. And we've got another Robert on the call, so then we'll know who we're addressing.
Right, so that'll give good separation.
Yeah. There you go.
Also, Dusty is available if you'd like. You can be.
Yeah, so if you go Dusty. Yeah.
Yes, so, it is. It is. Well, you made some really interesting, Bob, some really interesting observations with respect to cargo codes, which are a little minor fascination of mine. And you Yeah, it is. It's a fascinating idea and this literal observation of human behavior. And I think it explains a lot of the sort of when we talk about megalithic structures, it explains why the lower you go, the higher the technology of building skills it takes to create the wall, the blocks. And so
Right.
the newer blocks seem to be of a lesser technological production than the older blocks. And so, that idea of the cargo cult really does sort of ultimately explain some of this sort of actual geological evidence, but also sort of how our cultures have actually devolved, as opposed to like Walt Disney told us, things would be getting better. That there is also things get worse, and so cargo cults sort of are an example of how humanity can take reality and turn it into fantasy, and I think that's fucking fascinating. Excuse me. So I want to hear more from you on that.
Well, and there appears to be some truth to the concept that after the cataclysm occurred 12,900 years ago, there may have been visitors who came to Earth to help restart civilization, to replant and reseed the agriculture and the husbandry and many of the skills that, frankly, a civilization who reaches a level of advancement just with, when you lose your entire civilization to a cataclysm, you're trying to figure out how to do these things again from scratch. And you've been depending on your machines or a cycle or a system that's now changed. And exactly. Exactly.
Like numbers, like
it was. And, it's interesting that you bring up Mad Max, because I believe that our consciousness will create these mirrored moments of concept. And the entire Mad Max concept is probably fairly close to accurate in terms of the breakdown of civilization and the uprising of the worst elements that, were out there. And, what that
My
might
mic's
mean
not
for
working,
how
guys.
we
I'm
look
sorry.
at rehabilitation.
My mic. You
call.
guys can see me on the call, but literally I had it muted here because we were doing the intro, and I unmuted you guys to talk, and I didn't unmute myself. I'm sorry, everyone. It was really intelligent and smart. There you go. So that's all I can say.
I heard you on Skype.
It was Mad Max. It was great. It was fun. Anyway, I'm sorry. Keep going there, Robert. And hi, everyone. I literally did a whole intro. I introduced everyone, Buddy, and everyone. Like they didn't hear anything of that. I can't believe it. Well, guys, just pretend I did all that. It's always something, isn't it? Isn't it? It's always something. I can never do a perfect launch of a show. It's always something. Anyway, so. But still, it's
part of your brand.
It's part of my brand, yeah.
Your brand.
Anyway, go ahead, Robert. Thank you so much.
It makes it more accessible. And he would prefer to be called Bob.
It's good.
Bob, sorry.
It's good to know. It's good to know everybody here is human. That's the important part of it. But so when we talk about electric universe and electric geology and, a cataclysm and a post-cataclysm world and these megalithic structures, I think my favorite megalithic structure and development is in India, in Sri Lanka, where you can see this, giant escarpment left over from the cataclysm, right? You've got this, I think it's 30 or 40 acres that sits above, a couple hundred feet above the rest of the valley around it. So you have this cataclysm that wipes out and creates this single large, column in the middle. And then one of these advanced individuals built their palace at the top, and that was how they defended themselves. And I think that it's probably an element that gives us some concept of what it was like in this previous civilization right before it collapsed under the cataclysm itself. Because the technology used in defense of this area, of this complex, is stunning. I mean, nobody can explain how it works, but it can flood entire fields that have shiny bases in pools of water that you can't tell if it's 2 feet deep or 12 feet deep. And so all of these things are part of the mystery that begins with this cataclysm 12,900 years ago, where we seem to have no history before that whatsoever, other than cavemen and Neanderthal, which to me just doesn't smack of the truth.
You got a point there. I actually am not. I'm not fond of their chronology, especially this gradual approach. It's clear that, I mean, just by looking at the people, just hearing the stories of the ancient Greeks going to Egypt to learn things, even then the mystery schools and so forth, and then you hear, of course, the depictions from Rome, and thus of what this was like, and of course the story of Mark Antony and Cleopatra and all that junk. Well, my thoughts come in going, these guys are living on top of, they're like, what would it be like if raider gangs or something just took over and eventually occupied areas, but pretended to be something they're not, like a mafia? That's kind of my feeling. Like, they're using what they had, but they didn't develop it. They didn't start this. There's no friggin' way a bunch of people who were sitting there who are literally having trouble feeding themselves build a 42-story structure that's a jewel. That's engineering. That's a lot of engineering. And the stuff underneath the ground for that alone. And that's just that area. And there's other places in the world that say, whoa, whatever they were doing here was technologically advanced, in the sense that whatever the conditions of the earth were, they were utilizing it to their fullest potential, and obviously doing things we can't do.
And now we have Göbekli Tepe, which shows that exact same scenario occurring, where you have a technology creating megalithic structures with no apparent society building around it. So it was it almost looks like a training ground or a birthing center. Was not a living place for these, and it absolutely supports what you just said, Neil, that these technological advancements are happening in explosions as opposed to in baby steps, and that does imply either, in my opinion, an alien extraterrestrial intervention, or a species from a previous epoch that survived a catastrophe that comes back as a demigod.
Or just they found the books.
Yeah.
Just like we did. That's what made us happen.
Well, yeah, that's a good point, too. Yeah.
Could you raise the screen up, Neil, on that lower window?
Yeah. I have it down. Go ahead. Sorry, I didn't mean to.
Yeah. At least that way we can see what they're talking about, and because we've done the introductions, and Robert, you have a pretty face, but we're going to start to see your act.
Okay, I see where you're going. I actually kind of, when it came up with a lot of Mad Max footage, I sort of dropped it down again because I didn't want to get dinged. So,
right.
But keep going, please.
Yeah. So I think it's one of the things we can look at here when we try and understand what happened. In my opinion, if you want to take a next step into understanding Earth's history of humanity, the first thing you have to do is acknowledge the cataclysm 12,900 years ago. If you don't acknowledge that cataclysm, then any presumption about how people evolved, or the type of settlements that they created, or the technology that they had, or the language that they used, or the writing that they developed, none of these are going to make sense, because we aren't acknowledging, one, a catastrophic event that changed the entire consciousness of every man, woman, and child on Earth. And it also doesn't take into account that we have to look at the megalithic structures as something that could have predated that event. And if so, which ones, or was it all of them? and what does it tell us about that civilization? I think Mystery History did a great video, and one of their theories is that these rectangular blocks represent a first consciousness or a first civilization, and the second civilization used polygonal blocks. And those polygonal blocks represent the peak of our technological advancement on the planet. When I say our, I mean where we were.
Right.
And this is how you can sort of begin to create a timeline that makes more sense. And so when you look at the pyramids, for example, if my theory is right that the Eurasian plateau represents the near impact, then that means that anything within 2,000-3,000 miles of that had to have been completely obliterated, which is what we see with the formation of the Mediterranean Sea. So if the Mediterranean Sea was formed in this cataclysm 12,900 years ago, and the pyramids sit just off of the Mediterranean Sea, then it's probably a good bet to say that the pyramids were developed after the cataclysm, but probably using the technology from the previous civilization to do so.
Well, they were smaller stones, but still done in wonderful, I guess you could say, jewel-like polygonal ways. They obviously had that no mortar technology.
Right.
The same thing, but obviously we see examples of that, but even larger as we go back. Baalbek, of course, comes to mind instantly, and of course the Egyptians and Romans and Assyrians built on top of that. But some of those structures are on that layout are incredibly old, and we don't even know how old.
I got
Baalbek.
James,
Baalbek, the stones there, they're left in situ. When this event happened, they were over. In the process of moving them or whatever. They just they were left in situ. So
the same thing with the Assyrian, or what was it, the bull sarcophagus there, just in the middle of the hallway in Egypt. There, it's just
right. Yeah,
left there.
Right. When it happened,
they just were done. They were like, okay, we can't lift these anymore. Now this thing weighs way too much to move, or whatever, or we no longer have our that little thing that I had, my Star Trek device that moved it around, and I just used it to anti-grav it across the floor. It doesn't work anymore. Like obviously I'm talking crazy, but you never know, because one of the things that bothers me is the
wheel isn't just there anymore. That's all.
Oh well, okay, you can think of it that way, but I try to think of it as of what the conditions were, whether or not, I mean, there had to be a physical change. Those things are really hard to move. And they didn't scuff them. They didn't break the edges off that we would, trying to pry them off the floor. Like they were considered very, moved very well. Like you would see something, you could imagine something in Star Trek doing it, but you could also imagine that maybe they used some sort of form of water, perhaps. Like, who knows what they were doing. Clearly.
Well, what we see from so one of the things that really caught my attention, and this is how I work, snippets come along and I plug them in the back of my mind until I find something useful to use them on. We all know, I'm sure, that when we're in the car and we turn a corner fast, right, that motion that throws us across the car in the other direction is electric. That is an electromagnetic phenomenon. Inertia is doing
yes.
that, and it's electromagnetic in nature. In these craft that, I think this group and most people listening to this can agree that the government has back engineered technology called electrogravitic technology. What that technology does is cancels mass. These craft are literally floating on the electromagnetic wave of the planet. I believe these earlier civilizations had the ability to cancel the mass of these stones. Now, there may have been a point where they couldn't cancel it anymore, because maybe they only cancel, let's look at it this way. If the technology cancels 92% of the mass, right, then that means that we only have to lift 8% of the weight of a block. So if the block weighs 100 tons, it only weighs 2 tons now. Well, we can probably imagine them moving a 2-ton block. And, how did they do that? I don't know. I am really, really curious about these protrusions that come in pairs on all of these blocks. And, was there something to how those were used in order to transport the blocks themselves?
That's the key.
Yeah.
James, a point that you made earlier is that science or society or whatever, they don't acknowledge evidence as it is. And it's like, how do you, they make it very, very difficult for you to put on a narrative when they don't recognize what's obvious, what's
yes.
right there. Now, they're doing the same
in your
thing
face, obvious.
They're doing exactly the same thing in modern science today as they proclaim it. They say that the Earth has rotated exactly the same orbit, same daily rotation. We have records that in the 8th century, in 743, the moon changed its orbit. And you can tell, I mean, they've got the geological evidence, they've got it right there. And the eclipses don't work unless you change the orbit slightly to a different astronomical year. But they are just going to pretend, no matter what you say or do or believe, that the Earth has always been in that orbit for millions of years, and the Earth's rotation has not changed. And it's just obvious that it has. And, they're not willing and to get that into the mainstream and, force them to recognize the facts for what the records say. You can't move without facts being acknowledged for what they are. It's just a lock. And
one of the things that startles me that scientists aren't acknowledging is, so if you go to the beach, you can see that you go to the beach in different places. You've got these limestone formations around the water, and then you've got sand. So why isn't limestone forming on top of the sand, everybody? I mean, if limestone is forming here, and this is a lake that you say has been here for 10, 15, 20,000 years, shouldn't the process continually be going on? And yet you go to the beach and you can swim out 150, 250 feet and you're still seeing sand. You're not seeing limestone created. You're not seeing limestone shelving, like you would expect, because you're surrounded by it everywhere you go.
Right.
You find sand. And that's because in the cataclysm, not only was the planet moved from its navigational point around Saturn, but in the cataclysm, sand is a byproduct of this electrical escarpment that occurred across the surface.
And actually limestone as well, probably because of the nature of, I asked my father one time, I go, what is lime anyway? As you had said, what's limestone? What's going on here? And this is my father. He says, well, I think it's like little bones of shellfish type of creatures or something. He said it like that, and I was like, okay. I just moved along. I didn't really care. Yeah. But my father has a grade 6 education, so I'm not expecting him to know this stuff, right? But that I never really questioned it. But you're right. The fact that we have these all over the planet, and that they are, we have situations where, when we talked about, in Canada, there's fill everywhere. We are filled with fill. It's covering everything. Just a layer of dirt. Now that could be topsoil, could be anything else. But as you said, as certain things happen, we also noticed that, especially on beaches, I've had people who just bring me things that have been welded together by lightning, because beaches get hit quite often with lightning strikes. So I'm wondering, could massive electrical storms that are imagine a thunderstorm 100 times more powerful than today rolling across the landscape, you'd have to hide from that. Maybe you go near a dolmen, maybe go to a cave, but it's not permanent. It's temporary, but still you don't want to be outside. And, it would also probably keep you from large amounts of animals, because if you had a lot of animals, you have to keep them somewhere because they'll get hit and get killed. So, or, just from events like that. So would you be nomadic? What's going on here? And why do you think 12,900? A lot of people, by the way, have that number, so I'm not against the number. But I just want, for the people at home and for everyone here, what's your hinge on that number?
So in my videos I asked myself, I can pick a couple of different ones looking at the chart of the Younger Dryas event. Mm-hmm. Walt Thornhill made a really good point. Dave Talbot has made a really good point in a recent video trying to explain, I accepted the concept that the Venus cataclysm occurred early on when I watched it, because I think they make a very compelling argument about the myths and the Greek legends sharing a lot of this information. So I accepted that, but I had this one very, eating me question, which was, okay, but how? I mean, the space is really, really big. And right now, Venus is a long ways away. And so how in this, how do you make this very near impact in the Eurasian plateau occur from, incredible distances, if there were incredible distances? And when he explained the idea of a 3-planet, planetary configuration of Mars, Venus, and Earth, I went, okay, I can accept that. That makes sense. Then you look at the recent research paper that came out, which says, hey, guys, guess what? Somebody detonated a nuclear bomb in the atmosphere of Mars and blew up the atmosphere. And when you look at their evidence and their research on it, you got to go, yeah, look, you've got isotopes that are found, which are only occur in a nuclear explosion. They're not found in nature. You've got, when it happens, the bubble around the planet will actually create a ring on the other side. It'll leave a manifestation on the surface where the two sides of the atmosphere come together like a bubble if it popped. And so when they made that discovery, it made me think back and go, okay, so is it possible that someone triggered the atmosphere on Mars to come undone? And if you look at the temperature charts on the Younger Dryas impact, you see this oscillation occurring until suddenly you drop down to zero. And at my best estimation, that happened 12,900 years ago. And that's just looking at the chart and guessing based on the information that they give. It seems to make sense that it fits with Solon saying 9,600 years before, which puts us about 11 to 12,000 years.
We have a Graham Hancock connection too, obviously, with the 10,500, which would BC, which would be 12,500. But I'm not really hung up on that. I've just heard a lot of different dates for particular cataclysms.
Yeah.
Obviously, the Earth has gone through. Just in honesty, I don't think anyone here. And we have a lot of people here, but no one denies electrical interactions on the surface of planets. But when we talk about cataclysms, we know there has been at least one good flood. Being near a planet that's larger than us, being the moon of a planet, okay, let's say, even no matter where that was, the tides would be astronomical. And if it stayed in one spot, they would also be astronomical in that one spot. And if that was over a pole, great. But the end result is that once that water rebalanced, well, you're in trouble. It's going to...
Going back, James, going back to the lime thing, let's say some event occurred and it didn't automatically change everything into lime. But then the input of the sun for many seasons, there's a certain layer that the sun's direct energy would transmute those into what they have been prepared for by the event all over the world.
There is a cooking action. It's quite clear that if there are events like you're describing, Robert, which I'm looking at your video now, and you're seeing that the landscape has been pulled or there's been arcs, magnetic or electric, going up and over and so forth between certain parts of the planet, as Andy Hall has attested. And as we see on the sun, there would be it wouldn't actually be necessarily touching the planet because of our atmosphere and other dielectric effects. Now, from the outside, you'd think it'd be touching the planet, but if you were standing there, it would be still miles above your head, or perhaps maybe at least feet, because we'd have quite a good dielectric effect there. It doesn't stop transfer. It just sort of creates a capacitance buffer, but the heat generated at that layer would be astronomical. I think that's why the tops of Devil's Tower in Wyoming is cooked, and other areas look like they've been cooked because they stick up into that. And of course, that idea that things on the surface would be exposed to extreme amounts of radiation, thermal and across the EM spectrum. Whether or not it be hard radiation or not, it would be irrelevant. It would just be like being under a 2,000 watt lamp. You're gonna die.
And that's the question with the Vishnu schist, right? You've got this rock which makes no sense in the heart of the Grand Canyon, and the only way that you can truly explain it, in my video that I did in the Grand Canyon, the only way you can explain it is what this guy says: high pressure and high intense energy. Okay, You got to give me more than that, because you're telling me what happened there, but you're not. How did it do that? And nobody wants to. But if you take the information and you start to look at these things slightly differently, for example, one of the things that I think we should talk more about in terms of how it happened is to frame things as an electron extraction event. The Grand Canyon was an electron extraction event. The escarpment of the entire thing was about the electrons being drawn out of it and pulled up into this giant, vortex that existed over California all the way up to Washington. That vortex carried such an electric potential, fed by Yellowstone's volcano, and the limestone in the Grand Canyon was simply being drawn out as an electron to balance that positive cathode that was formed in the volcano, the acidic volcano of Yellowstone. And it makes perfect sense that would happen. And so if we look at any strike like the Grand Canyon as an electron extraction event, we can then look around the Earth and go, okay, now we can start identifying where high levels of electricity or electric inequality existed. And then we can say, well, okay, now I understand why in northern Wisconsin the rivers all flow into Lake Superior. Why? Well, because Lake Superior created a sinkhole of electrical potential, and it began sucking electrons from the ground around it. As with anything, the highest degree of destruction or of electron extraction is going to be at the origination, and that origination is Lake Superior, and that's why you have the outward growth of the Lichtenberg figure. It is the pathway for the extraction of the electrons, and that's how our entire riverway systems were formed, or at least that's my current theory. And so when I do my next video, that's where I'm working on, understanding it. The problem is trying to understand the process, how they happen in line of each other. For example, you had the arcing that came and formed the entire riverway of the Mississippi River all the way up into Minnesota and North Dakota. But there's a river system in Wisconsin called the Wisconsin River, which goes over, meets up with the Mississippi, and then if you look at it, the river seems like it should have flowed north at one point. And in fact, a paper was written in 2018 that says the Wisconsin River flowed backwards at one point in time based on the declination of the limestone along the riverbed. And if all you can think of is the slow process of a river, cutting down the path, then that's what you're going to come up to. But if you accept that there was a discharge that sucked the electrons and it began around what's known as Cascade Mountain, you realize that the reason there's a declination going into Wisconsin for the river to flow backwards, if you will, was because it formed by going up and meeting the charge created by the sinkhole of Lake Superior. And so you had the Wisconsin River was formed first, and then the Mississippi River came up because it followed the Ion Trail. But because the cataclysm had moved further west, when it got up to western Wisconsin, it took a left and it went up to North Dakota chasing after the source of energy. But, I can't think of anything other than an electron extraction event that would get that much soil out of its way and yet not leave rubble all over the place.
Oh my God, you're absolutely right that is I wouldn't call it that. I would just say electric machining, but the end result is the same. And you're 100% correct it just doesn't do it justice. I guess is the term, because of how,
James here, the Yellowstone has moved, and it used to be in eastern Washington, and it was even further west at times. All these kinds of Yellowstone kind of things around the world have do those movements, that kind of stuff. The other thing is the geological time. You just divide by 80, and you get a fairly better layering dates and stuff like that. So I got the noise here. I got to jump off.
Thank you. So let's go back to the question, and we could just call it electric machining.
Oh well, you call it whatever you like. I'm just helping other people at home, so we know that we're talking about the same process. That's all.
Right. And so the reason I personally think that calling it an electron extraction event makes sense is because we have to explain how rock metamorphed in the cataclysm. Like what happened to it that turned limestone into dolostone, right? And you can only do that through heat, but then why is it surrounded by sand? So if you go to Door County, Wisconsin, you'll find these large square dolostones in northern Wisconsin at the very tip. I grew up in the Chicago suburbs, but we had a cabin in Door County when I was growing up, which is the thumb, if you will, of Wisconsin, way all the way at the tip. If you look at the very tip, you'll see that there's actually a bay called Garrett Bay. I learned to sail up there. And all the rocks there when I grew up, these are the most incredible skipping rocks you could ever find. These things, they're dolostone, they're all thin and they're all flat. And when I was a kid, I used to find these rocks were about a foot by a foot, square rock. In the middle was a big round circle, like somebody had machined it. I was like, I mean, I'm a young kid. I don't know anything about, what that beach's history was. I'm going, did somebody bring these rocks in here? Because these rocks didn't exist like this anywhere else in the county. I mean, there are other places that they exist, but here specifically, not only was there no sand on the beach itself, but all of the rocks had been turned to dolostone. They were all flat. They all show signs that they were probably limestone before this. How does that happen? Well, you have to have an electron exchange in there somehow. Either more electrons came into it, or electrons were pulled out, and what was left became more dense.
We actually use versions of that process to clean solar panels and such. You run a solar panel in reverse to cause a positive thing, basically repel dust off the surface, and the dust goes flying. And you can just turn it back to regular, and you basically don't have to go out all the time and clean them off, because and that's but that electrostatic type of force, it doesn't take much. But when you're talking about obviously tons and tons of sand, the end result is the same though. To move that sand requires so much force, and it has to come from somewhere. And you're right, there would be it would be right on the barrier. The land is sort of like a boundary layer to the next step, which would of course be somewhere up above to the next thing. And of course the conduit between that is tornadoes and hurricanes and storms. Those are the conduit between that point that has to go through our relatively thick atmosphere. And by the way, whoever God is, thank you, because it's a great atmosphere. Otherwise, we would be dead long ago. Because look at Mars. Because I'm glad we have that thing,
Yeah, James, Sapphire Project talked about the transmutations causing little dimples in the center of these things.
That. Yes. I was going to mention, but yes. There's actually a video of the Sapphire Project with little dimples or little holes in the middle of their towers, and then of course they were trying to understand it. Now, of course, my immediate thoughts is like the Talbashar volcano, sort of like going up and raining down in a umbrella like half torus. But still, I think that's what you're talking about, right, James? Well,
okay. The little dimples in the process of the transmutations. So
I kind of wanted to say something to James about how you said everything was like a resonance and harmonics. I was just reading recently in the Velikovsky affair how they were talking about resonances and electronics, and how about the atmosphere would bulge at the equator. And that information at that time was yet to be discovered. But yet, Robert, Bob, since you're working with Chris Selly, they showed with Terrence's work that when they created the planet Saturn, how it had the atmosphere had a bulge at the equator, and used harmonic resonances and toroidal fields and what was that? Magnetic fields and toruses and vortexes. Yeah. I just liked how it's all starting to come together, and now we're starting to actually explain it. And Velikovsky, even Einstein were talking about it so long ago and waiting for it to be discovered.
Well, it will. I think you're absolutely right. One thing about Tesla and that idea right there is that he described it, just having the right idea that we are a small metal ball in a sea of magnetism. I think he's what he said. Just that image alone is, well, true in a way. And that is a correct way of looking at the situation. And unfortunately, we're not, I mean, it's hard when you step from, in the materialist idea, from just dots of light in a black sky. You know, it's to step into that idea as an engineer is like, that's where the gulf between astrophysics and engineering is, right there. Go on, Robert. Sorry.
Mm-hmm.
Or Bob.
So,
I'll do it. I just typed in Robert to like right now to make the screen.
I knew it. I knew you were going to do that. I'd want to. It's hilarious.
He's waiting for me.
Bob, I have a question for you.
Please.
You talked about kind of how you come across information and you sort of store it and kind of keep it and look for matches to it later and kind of, you know, develop an idea around a thing. I think the same way. And one of the things that's been on my sort of radar so much lately is, and it started with like it's balls, like, you know, the blueberries and the buckyballs and all these huge balls that have been found all over South America, and you know, the ball that you found in the middle of the piece of clay, you know, in your childhood. These and obviously we've seen this with the Sapphire Project, tiny little spherules that are being produced out of seemingly nowhere. I think what comes to mind is sort of like the label I'm putting on this file is these are creation events. Would you disagree with that? Does that resonate with you guys?
It does. I was in North Dakota, up in Bismarck, about a year and a half ago. I stopped at the Bismarck Museum of Natural History, and outside of the place, they've got a giant piece of petrified wood, but they also have a number of stones that are almost circular, but then they also have this crystalline formation in the middle of them. And you know, I was on my way out, and I asked the lady at the desk, I said, "So, do you have any idea how these things were formed?" And she goes, "No, I said, "They were blueberries, probably." I said, "She looked this up. They're an electrical formation." And she was like, "Oh, yeah, really?" Well, you know, but I don't understand quite the process of how they're formed or why they're circular in nature. But I do think that
I can describe it
is a
in
great
detail,
question.
but it's okay. It's just, the Z pinch makes balls. It's a thing. Don't worry about it.
Yeah, Bennett pinch.
Yeah, but we'll talk about that later. Please go on, guys.
All right. Well, yeah. So then these Z pinches, these blueberries and the balls that are created at these micro levels or even these large levels, these are just manifestations that created round balls. I think that we have a lot of balls that people don't realize are part of this cataclysm as well, and they're not all going to be round. But this blueberry piece was a really big part of the understanding about how we create granite that ends up, so one of the videos that I'll be doing soon is on the rivers, as I mentioned. And I'm doing some live shots from Osceola, Wisconsin, which is along the St. Croix River. And everything around you is limestone. They got roads cut through, and you're surrounded by limestone. But up on the cliffs and the walking trails around it are these large boulders of dolostone and probably granite. And you have to ask yourself, how did these get there? What happened? And I think it makes sense now that you mentioned it, that in these Z pinches, it would create these highly focalized, and not only that, but from a dielectric standpoint, would have attracted this dust in the atmosphere to create these sphericals. That makes sense.
Oh yeah,
is that what you're getting at?
Markowitz convection. No, I'll me to explain it. The Lorentz force actually in extreme forces will pull everything, magnetic or not, like a frog can float in a magnetic field. So it doesn't matter. Everything will move if you have a strong enough electric force. And the size of the ball made is relative to the current going through it. And that's basically Ampere's law. But when you put it together, you actually have a swinging, basically you'd say, it will shave off everything outside a particular layer will be gone, and everything inside a layer will be crushed. And that basic effect is, I think, how planets are formed, and basically why we have a ridge across certain planets like moons. And of course,
I'd like to add that
that's just how it happens in electric situations.
Well, I'd like to add some of those boulders are erratics that were moved by water when the thunderbolt of the gods melted half of the ice cap at 12,900 years
well,
ago,
they also would
and
have
then
just hit
melted
the
the
ground.
rest of it at 11,600 years ago.
There are some in Antarctica, actually. Yeah, you're right.
Yeah. There were also the Smoky Marble Mountain that was mentioned in the second geology tour that we just had.
Let's let Bob speak, though.
Oh, yes. No, that's fine. That's fine. So, here's one of my questions that I'd like to address. So, a lot of geologists and folks will use this concept of these giant, glaciers that skidded across the surface of the earth and eradicated everything that was there. I believe that there was probably a buildup of snow and there was a buildup of material. The thing about that is that when you look at the Utnapishtim cataclysm, and I was surprised because Velikovsky even says this. There were two events. One was fire and one was water. Well, this is what I'm saying. It was a cataclysm 12,500 years, 900 years ago that was a fire cataclysm. And then you had the water cataclysm of the solar micronova 5,000 or 6,000 years ago. And even in today's society, we know that 90% of the population lives on the coast. So if you want to understand why it is that we have no history from 6,000, well, very little history from 6,000 to 12,000 years as well, it's because most of civilization was once again wiped off the earth in that cataclysm. And it wasn't so much that the polar ice caps melted as it is the star water formation in our atmosphere from a solar micronova inundated the planet. And it may be that one of the reasons that these large blocks were left in situ as they were coming down, pathways is that in the cataclysm of the solar micronova, they didn't have any notice. They may have had some time to watch Venus and Mars interact before Venus came at Earth. But I don't think the solar micronova worked like that.
A lot of times, I bet you there was a bunch of people who were sitting there going, don't worry about it. It's not going to happen. Not going to happen. It's good. No, it's a little unstable, but it's been there for thousands of years, guys. Relax. It's going to be fine. And then, of course, as it goes flying into space, and of course, Venus turns into Medusa. It goes, it's still fine, guys. It's still fine. Right. Everyone's running for their lives. It's going to be fine.
Turning to pillars of salt.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, maybe not so fine. Okay, everyone run. Like that,
Bob, do you know about pulse meltwater 1A and 1B?
So I'm familiar with them from I've heard of them. I haven't really looked closely at them, but
one is at the beginning of the Younger Dryas, and one is at the end of the Younger Dryas.
Right. So at the beginning of the Younger Dryas, I believe that would have,
Well, sorry, one is at 12,900 years, and the other one is at 11,600 years ago.
That makes sense. And so if we look at what happened, if we were in an orbit around Saturn, and then we moved to be around the new sun, right? You would have had an initial water event from that experience, which would have melted any ice caps that exist. But you would have then had a second one as we disconnect from the Saturn connection. You could have had another event as we connected to the electrical potential of the current sun. And that might explain why there were two separate water events, because at that point in time, when that happened, we had this massive increase in the Earth's temperature, which suggests that we reached a brand new state of equilibrium and stability, which, for 1,000 years or so, we didn't.
Right.
Those make sense.
Could I explain some of the work that I do in the quote unquote lab? I work with high voltage electricity, and I put it right on rocks, and I create crevices and dendrites, and it produces. What it does is it shoots off big rock and boulders as you're working with it sometimes, and these sometimes are called glacial erratics. But some of them clearly are like sharp edges, very sharp edges in the middle of nowhere, like it just got torn off of the ridge of a mountain. And I have good up close pictures of these, and I just wanted to put that out there because that happens. If it happens on big scale too, we can envision it.
Well, yeah,
I think,
the Z pinches also go on all scales as well, from down little microspherules all the way up to suns.
yeah, I think one of the things that was most influential in my understanding and paradigm on the electric universe was Donald Scott in a speech he did a number of years ago, and he was saying, you know, traditional scientists don't like my models because they don't understand them. And he says they don't understand it because I keep trying to explain to them this model is scalable. And
Yes.
that's one of the beautiful things about the electric universe model is that
Yes.
you can scale this and you can explain things all the way up to the, you know, galactic and Laniakea or even the universe, and all the way down to the atom or the quarks and muons or whatever you should be able to see an equal manifestation all the way around the globe.
Or very similar effects going on, yes.
Well,
not exactly the same effects,
not exactly,
but similar.
Of course, but the rules of electromagnetism that we learn in engineering, that Robert has learned and so forth, regarding how capacitors function, how charges are moved, and the dielectric strength of materials and so forth, all of that doesn't change when you leave the planet. It's still the same rules.
Right.
So there is a potential between the Earth and the Sun. Doesn't matter what you think it is, there is one. We know the ionosphere is a difference in the Earth. We know that it's 500,000 volts. We know this. We know the area. We know, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. By doing just basic things, we can start understanding how much charge there is, how much can be moved, what's replenishing it, where is this ionization coming from? Just basic things like that. That's why the dust is moving on other planets, like simple things. And that to them is mysterious, and that bothers me that it is, because this is not complex stuff. You can learn this in a book. Like it's basics. Electricity 101 is what it basically is, and you're not knowing it freaks me out, because you're supposed to be smart guys talking about planets. Come on.
Well, they don't knock on each other's doors. That's the problem.
That's the problem, right? Anyway, just for interest's sake, this is in northern Canada, Baffin Island. I have a picture right there. If you notice, the top of this thing has 120-degree 3 marks of 3 dikes that lead to the top of it. So this is an anode blister in the middle of Baffin Island. Baffin Island, of course, being stripped bare. Like, it is crisscrossed electrically. So these are supposed to be glacial trenches, of course, but they're obviously not. You're right. I mean, this thing was, whatever land was there, they just ripped it right off. It's bare now.
And that's one of the reasons, when I was looking at Canada and trying to formulate my a hypothesis about why it's so different. And I often tell people, look, it's really hard to understand what's going on and what happened, because it's so large. I mean,
you have building
and
deposition in different areas. And of course, you have all this material falling. Some of it is getting welded and some of it's not, because it's not hot enough. It falls as dirt, and it hits water and so forth. There's a lot of water there too. And plus a lot of this events would have caused a lot of steam, which of course would inhibit the welding process, I would think. Places where it was dry, it would be just like painting a surface. It would just weld to the surface. Your rock would just weld there. But if you're in a steamy area, trying to get that to happen might not work so well, and you're going to get areas which are just falling as fill, covering areas, and just inundating, like it did on perhaps maybe even like Mars did with the Sahara Desert, so to speak, if that was the case.
You mean inundating mammoths and freezing them in their place?
No, I meant like just instead of burying us with rock, which is welding the surface, and anything that was covered gets welded to it and part of the surface now, and it's buried. Some of it would just get buried with dirt, because we have a lot of dirt, like it was just material, like where the hell did all this come from? Now, some of it, I assume, was backflow from whenever this disconnection happened and Saturn left and all this water had to flow northwards. But, there's a lot of supposition there, so I leave it open.
I think that we have to, my personal view of the glaciations in particular, there wasn't as much water on this planet as people think. And you have to remember that if my theory is correct, that we had the expansion, frankly, most of the water on the planet would have flowed into that ocean at that point in time. Not that there wouldn't have been weather patterns that distributed the water elsewhere, but it would take a lot to get the ice up into the ice caps in a meaningful way. And just as you just pointed out here, Neil, with this anode scar. Right. If giant glaciers came across the planet, then we should see these areas where we can identify large electrical escarpments. We should see this glaciation scraping off the hard edges of these canyons or off the hard edges of these Lichtenberg fissures, and we just don't see that.
No,
we see boulders. I believe that the flood could have carried these ice down with boulders in it, but I don't think that a glacier scraped the surface of the earth and went to the melt point.
Oh, no. I mean, look, I'm sure that Buddy has made he could zoom in on a picture that he worked on. It looks just like this mine. I mean, that's practically ship rock in the middle. If you just put a spire there in the top, I mean, it's 3 dikes leading to the middle, 180 degrees. I mean, it looks like a rock that's, 120, but it has you can even see a Lichtenberg figure leading up towards it from this side that we're looking at this angle. I mean, this looks like typical even. I mean, atypical. And of course, there's a mine there because so much current had gone through that area that it metastasized or metamorphosized rock and fused it,
transformed materials into other materials. That's what electricity does.
And now it starts to make sense when we say that they find a vein. What they really find is a Lichtenberg figure.
Yes, a vein
of transmorphed material in the rock.
Exactly. That's why gold appears that way. You're right. Yeah. And of course, that's why you go to northern Canada and stuff to find this stuff. Because, I mean, if this is the case, just looking at the Torella from Birkeland himself in the where you saw it, how it was connected a lot around the 60 degree, the Arctic Circle on the Torella because of the magnetic field. Well, there will be lots of hits in that area. So, of course, you're going to get material that gets changed more in that area. That's where we find kimberlite pipes and other things like that. So, or at least that's what it seems to be. I mean, we are, of course, working with what we have.
So, Neil, what's your best example or explanation, rather, for the calcification and petrification of the tree? How do you see this occurring? Because it's clear that it happened in an instantaneous manner because they didn't rot. There's no, when you look at these things, there's no rotting going on them. You can see where they probably burned before they were transmuted. But what is your methodology on that? What do you think?
Tell them about Alberta, Neil.
You mean the power line? Yeah, there's a power line.
Yes, sir.
A power line that fell and actually hit a stump in Alberta, and it buried a hole in the it made basically flash froze a tree stump. I'm going to actually find a picture of that, but electricity can do that today.
Wasn't it multiple tree stumps, Neil?
I'm actually looking for the picture, so I'll find it.
I think it was multiple tree stumps that were not instantly turned, but over a few hours, they didn't turn the power off. They were turned into stone, petrified.
Oh, wow.
Yes.
So did it occur because you had the introduction of an electrical current, or did it occur because you had some sort of alignment of the fundamental structure?
No, the power lines had fallen down, and they were making contact with the ground.
But we didn't notice. No,
I understand that. What's the process though? So did electricity go in and align the atoms?
Okay, I know what you're saying. Okay, you're actually, this is actually electrical fission, I think, or fusion and fission. I would say that this is a lot easier than we give it credit for. We didn't even know that lightning bolts could cause fusion until just like 2 or 3 years ago. And of course, then we began to realize that this is what's causing these gamma rays that we're seeing or something. We're like, holy crap, this is coming from us. Like this is not a space thing. We're seeing it on the Earth. And, well, then, of course, this immediately leads to, okay, well, then the sun. And of course, this is why we see nuclear reactions on the surface. I go with Ito's structured atom model because of the way that he describes how fusion works and how it would not be as difficult as we make it out to be, because all you have to do is get an electron to bond two cores together, and suddenly that to get that to happen in a pinch like situation with Lorentz force being as strong as it is. I mean, look, we take materials and crush it into planets. Okay, we can make geodes out of the stuff. This stuff is obviously it's able to, the force is extreme if we want it to be. If you put a lot of current through it, it's extreme. I mean, to the point like we could generate 200,000 Teslas or more, which is enough to, I mean, well, I don't even want to describe how much that is, but it destroys everything. The coil that made it and everything around it is crushed because of how strong that is. So, and blown to pieces too because of the current you used. But while it was there, it measured this much. Well, that type of force, when you're dealing with it, oh yeah, sure, there's enough force there to push two nuclei together. Yep, I have no doubt that there is. And the only question is, what structures will be built? And that's why I kind of go with his model where he shows that certain things like carbon is really solid. It's hard to break, and it will fuse into two of them, become a sulfur. Boom, just like that, or something, or with two oxygen. And it was, I thought it was very wonderful. Now, before you go, James, that picture that's on the screen, I'm going to scroll through. This is not the exact thing, but this was a electrical conductor hitting. I'm not exactly sure where. Man-made fulgurites from high voltage power lines. So this is what they are here. That's a power line made that. That's on the ground. Like,
wow.
So these are quite large, and you can see what they look like a vulg, like you would see in the earth, like it was made. That's where you would go mining, right there. That's what you would look for, one of those, to go up that pipe and to mine. But this is, if you can see, that's just a power line. That's 94. Northern California made that because it was 7,200 volts, and we're talking 500,000 to 1 million volts, and on the other side of, like 1 million amps. So this is nothing compared to blowing a whole forest would be turned to. I mean, that's why I think the dinosaurs explode, things like that. Like the water inside that would flash, blow them to pieces, but the bones wouldn't. Some would, of course, and that's why they find them in pieces like they do. So finding a perfect specimen is hard. And I'm done. That was it.
James, that was excellent. Thank you.
Mount St. Helens blast 5 years later, they found petrified. So just a single event can petrify wood. That's not a problem.
We've actually found a piece in a tree. Just so you know, like I've actually found a physical piece of stone in a tree, and it's not the first time. So.
Oh wow.
Yeah, I think the ancients called that finding a thunderbolt in. Yeah. Anyway, also Sodom and Gomorrah. Most of the salt pillars that they found were trees. So I don't know whether the electrical input into the water created salt itself, or but the salt that was in there, that it forced it to go to the highest point and made those pillars, which mostly were trees. But I suppose if you were a human being standing on the tallest mount around, you might be saltified.
I would have no doubt that.
Yeah.
No doubt.
And as far as
rockified.
Rockified. You've been rocked. I'm going to a rock concert means a whole different thing back then.
I'm really interested in trying to figure out how you date, the Grand Canyon, because it, removed most of this stuff. So how you date is really kind of curious to me. But I think we can frame this pretty well. The magnetic frames that the reversals of the Earth 60,000 years ago, 45,000 years ago. I think we have two sources, Mathos and Boros, saying that the 364th, in the middle of the 364th century was the deluge. So that gives us a framework. I've got a reversal at 18,500. They've only found a disruption at 17,000 now, but I think they'll get there. And then there's the last one in the Joshua event to give us an orientation. Of course, the reversals are not the only disruptions that have occurred. We've had traditional floods at 1530 before the Common Era. That's the Augeas flood, the Dilution flood, probably the Exodus, and then the Great Flood, which I just gave you a date. But I think we can frame it in around 38,000 years ago. Most of these events, the big ones, they changed the thing. We can kind of box it into that by the magnetics and the reversals in the geological record that are they're not on geological time frames. They have their own chronology and their own time frame measurements. So, thank you.
Well, I have no doubt that there's some crazy, like how long ago these events occurred, like with the dating of the idea of the Grand Canyon. When you're looking at that clearly it has been events that have deposited some, maybe did some events in the middle, but then deposited more, and they seem to be in stages. Could be cataclysm. Now, some of these events, of course, a lot of this could be from another planet that it was taken from, and other parts on the Earth. As Robert, you have a thing when you describe some events where you found positive and negative strikes, even more than Andrew. Once he explained them in 2017, obviously it's become a bit of a hobby for some in the electric universe to find these. But you've noticed some big ones. So.
Yeah. And when I was looking at the North America coronal loops that occurred, so there's a couple things from this. So one, if a scientist out there who's not an electric universe guy and is trying to understand, the entire sunspot phenomenon, would like to, do more direct exploration, once you look at these coronal loops in North America, you actually have large manifestations of what happens on the sun, and you should study what it did to the Earth in order to understand what's happening on the sun. When I found the symmetry of St. James Bay, and more importantly Hudson Bay, with the Appalachian Mountains, right? Mm-hmm. We don't understand how large these things were, and when they it's that George, 4,000 miles. That means that the arc at least 6,000 or 8,000 miles. I mean, just imagine the size of this thing going up into the atmosphere and coming back down, and how incredible that would be to see this entire, strand of coronal loop, functioning itself over the entire northern portion of North America, which I don't believe was North America at the time. So we have all these large events that changed the structure of rock. It left these giant, when I finally realized what had happened to Canada, I was like, holy cow, right? And you start to go, well, now that makes sense. You had an influx of ions flowing through that entire area and escalloping all of the material. And then you go, well, where'd the material go? And then it starts to make sense why you have these really odd field lines that form the Appalachian Mountains. And simply a scientist who wants to look at this and who's studying coronal loops, if they want to look at what it looks like on the surface of the sun up close, go visit the Appalachians. You'll see the magnetic line flow as the material came down along it. And it's for me, it was an eye-opening moment. I was, I often sit at my desk when I'm putting these videos together. In fact, the video on the coronal loops wasn't even the purpose of that first video. I was trying to explain the formation of the Wisconsin River and the Mississippi River. And I was like, I'm missing something here. I get that there was an electrical discharge that had a bias towards Lake Superior. And in western Wisconsin, you have a large Lichtenberg figure that moves straight north after it gets across the thing. But I've been looking at this phenomenon that Florida has the same shape as James Bay for a long time. I mean, I've been looking at that for a long time, wondering what happened. Nothing made sense. Chris talked about this. Chris Seeley talked about this in terms of being a polarization area. It wasn't just a polarization area. It was literally that these two areas were manifesting the positive and the negative nodes of this coronal loop. And it really was. It was eye-opening. I thought, okay, well, I'm going to do this. I've been meaning to do this for a long time. So I literally went through what I do in the video. I deleted the material from the middle of it, and I stuck it over Florida. I went, well, damn, look at this. It fits right over the Appalachian Mountains. And I went, holy cow. And then I stepped back and I looked at it again. And I went, oh, my God, there you go. There's your two butterfly wings of the coronal loops.
You know,
and it's the scale of this thing.
You should never tell us that, because you know what's going to happen. Since a lot of Canadian snowbirds go down there, we're eventually going to demand that you bring it back. Florida, come on back up. We want it back up here. Okay, guys. And by the way, we want it just as warm as it was down there. You'll have to supply the heat. Anyway.
Well,
I would like to mention.
Here's an interesting. Oh, go ahead.
Sorry, I would like to mention. I'm looking currently at a map of kimberlite distribution around the globe, and they seem to come in pairs. There's a pair down in Australia. There's a huge pair, one in China and one in the northern Norway.
What you're telling me is that electricity moves in pairs?
We
already know
coronal loops. Well, coronal loops. We're talking about coronal loops.
Actually, those kimberlite pipes might not actually be that. They might actually be more of a semi-stable or semi-permanent sort of anode blister type of effect.
I was getting to the diamond mine thing in Australia, where the snake was seen leaping 150 miles from one area to another area.
Not denying that you could be totally right. I'm just saying that usually the pair thing, that's just a joke, but obviously.
It went right over my head. I'm sorry.
Yeah, because
being serious.
We talk about the pairs thing all the time about the
And now I'm hungry.
And okay, fair enough.
Well, one of the things that's very interesting. So if you're in Canada, here's a question that so lots of ideas, lots of theories roll around in my head when I get ready to do something. One thing that I think when we try and say, well, what was the atmosphere and the environment on Earth like prior to the cataclysm? I don't personally believe that we had giant polar ice caps across the north and the south. And the reason that I say that is, in the Appalachian Mountains, you have large veins of coal, right? And coal means that there was an organic matter that was in there. I think that I think the planet itself was a fairly warm planet with green growth over probably most of it, if not all of it. And when the coronal loops happened, it was literally lifting that material, all of that organic dirt and material, the trees, the whatever was there. It lifted that up, and in everything else, it created these layerings in the Appalachians that formed these coal deposits. Mm-hmm. These coal deposits are a manifestation of the organic material that was in Canada being extracted in the coronal loop and deposited down in the Appalachian Mountains. So the answer to your question is, we've been shipping you back your shit for a long time.
That wouldn't surprise me in the least. Because, clearly this has happened. I mean, organic material has to be separated. And it would be separated and put together, by the way. That's very weird for us to think about. But if you could imagine, it goes, all right, electrically speaking, we want to separate all the bones, the skin, the muscles, and the blood, all right? And all the fat.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and they're going to do that. It's going to do that whether or not you want to or not, because you've all been blown to pieces, right? And it's going to go and layer it out, just like it would rock. And then it will drop it back down to earth, and where it deposited will be, of course, it's cooking while it's doing this. There's a lot of energy that's going into this material because this is going through it. Obviously, things are happening to it as well. Hydrocarbons are being formed, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. So it's interesting because you start to get entirely different formation events and formation processes for all of this. I almost threw up. I know this sounds, a bit bombastic, but I literally almost threw up when I realized that all of the oil that we are using is actually a manifestation of the cataclysm. in the Gulf, for example, all the material from the flood pushed that into the Gulf, and then it was compressed by additional material that came down on it.
Yeah.
And that's why the field was, that's why you get this oil deposit in the Gulf. All of that organic material went there first.
We can't discount that some of these hydrocarbons may have come from interactions with comets and the big comet, Venus.
True.
Venus may have deposited a crap load of hydrocarbons on the Earth at one point.
Sure, and of course, and if there was life on Mars, we could be having some of it on Earth and have compressed it too. But the interesting fact, and this is the very scary part that I think that made him gag, that made me really think about this, is that if that is the case, then, and we know that there was a society on the planet at the time, then we could literally be burning our ancestors for fuel.
Burning grandpa, yeah.
Yeah, that was I went, oh my God, we're literally living off of dead beings.
Now, admittedly, there was probably a large amount of things there, but I mean, sure. I mean, just going to say there's going to be a lot of bacteria, a lot of other animals, but mixed in with that will have to be, because not all of it they would not have all turned to stone or salt, and not all of them lived, and not all of them just decayed and were eaten by other animals. Therefore, just by virtue of that.
And they were transformed from the mammoths to elephants, and from the giant lions to regular lions, and all manner of other animals that came after them. That's that wonderful idea of the Ebner effect or whatever. Is if the Earth changes the electric potential, do we suddenly have to sort of adapt to that? But there's so many things we had to adapt to. Like, our eyes are not made for certain colors. We like reds instead of blues. I mean, I can't tell you how much I hate those blue headlights.
Oh, I do too.
Yeah, it hurt my eyes. I'll take high beams from regular headlights any day than low beams from those.
Good old yellow.
Because we like red light in our eyes. We don't like the other light. It hurts us more. And so purple was good. See what I mean? Like, it's
purple dawn.
I mean, I was saying, it's quite obvious we might have lived in a completely different world. And that's okay. But what... And it would have changed the coloring on certain things. I mean, that's probably why certain seas were described as black, which are now blue.
Well, don't forget, the color of honey was described as green in hue, not yellow anymore. At one point, that changed.
Well, yeah, of course, Saturn's green.
So, Neil, you're bringing up an image here that I'd like to ask a question on, because this is an important video. I mean, when I saw this by Ben Davidson, it just surprised me. So, as a survey of the group on the call here, does it make sense that the Eurasian Plateau, that the Himalayas were formed in the cataclysm? Or does it make sense that the pole shift that is going towards the same spot because the mantle itself was carved in this event? Does that hypothesis resonate with anyone?
We're talking about
you kind of broke up a little bit. Could you repeat that?
Oh, sure. Sorry. So right now, Neil's showing a video from Suspicious Observer where he was showing an update on the path of the poles in the coming pole reversal.
Actually, this is your video, but
yeah. Oh, okay. Yeah. So does it make sense that does it make sense? And why would it be that the poles are heading directly for the near impact zone in the Eurasian Plateau?
My thoughts on why this is happening is because of the magnitude because it's not a stable system. It's a balanced system. And the current difference, I think, the current difference between the input and output of the poles will give the overall magnetic field. So, of course, it's going to wander. And, of course, it's going to wander around the weakest pole, which, of course, will be the North Pole, because we have more current coming in the south. But there has been arguments against that, obviously. But my thoughts are it should move because it's not connected to anything physical. It's a balancing act between the sun and the earth. I mean, that's why for example, I think it's Uranus that's lying outside, or Neptune. I don't know why I don't know that, but the magnetic field of that particular body is off to one side of and on a severe angle. So the Earth or the Sun's field is really affecting that, because it's so far off course. Now, I think that is something that's happening here, but of course, because I don't know the specifics, I would say it has to do between the Sun, the Earth, the Moon, and eventually it's going to wander. Now, you said it's heading towards something. I don't know what you're pointing out it's heading towards.
I think it might be also cymatics
Can we pull that video back up?
It's right here, yeah.
Neil, can we pull that image back up real quick from my video, from Ben's actually?
Is this it here?
Sure. It's just preview. There you go. It's the one you got on the right hand side there, but where he's got the dotted line showing the path of the current pole shift.
Oh. Okay, this one.
A little further beyond that. Yeah. That one right there. So this is the one that I'm pointing at, and I understand that there's going to be a drift, and we know that the poles have drifted over time. But when he put up when Ben laid out this image of the poles shifting, and that their path of meeting seems to be in the Eurasian plateau at the near impact zone. And so what I did in the video that I did on this, what it really seemed to me is that you had this conjoining of the poles, which on one end created the Eurasian plateau basin, but on the other side, it created the South Atlantic anomaly, which is exactly opposite the planet from it. Are the poles, did something happen to the mantle or the crust that is causing this pole shift to follow that same pathway? And the reason I ask is that if it is true that happening, it's following this groove path that it did in the cataclysm, that means that if we follow this backwards, we should be able to get an approach pattern of the planet as it approached, and it should give us a better idea of the interaction as it occurred.
That's actually, well, that doesn't surprise me with regards to if another body came in. One of the things that I thought about when we were talking about this, when you were talking about some of your ups and down drafts, obviously with regards to tornadoes and so forth, they would affect, if gravity is an electrical force and inertia, as we discussed earlier, is, then there will be situations where you'll be pulled there via gravity. Like, and it could be an expression of the Lorentz force. Like, I mean, there is nothing to stop you if it's considered that surface of the tornado or fire tornado to be ground, then everything nearby would be lifted and pulled towards it. So, and then flung up into space or whatever. So, I mean, you're the idea of the poles themselves in this case, because a body is impinging on it. I totally get that. Now, here, the reason that this might be happening here is that since the fields are getting weaker because of the minimum and so forth, they're going to wander more. It's like being off kilter because you're a wobbling, spinning top. Or a coin, and it's getting losing power. But it will be more affected by outside currents, blobs of plasma, would also be affected by currents inside the planet a lot more. So if there's activity that's happening inside the planet, this will be much more prevalent. Now, that could be an issue, and I don't like to be a doomsayer, but there could be an issue because it could change the electrical potentials across a bunch of boundary layers. So that could cause something. I don't know what, but like I said, I'm looking at this because each of these, we think about the Earth as being solid, but in actuality, coastlines are more conductive than the ocean is practically impossible to get through. But underneath the Earth, there's connections of lava and material that's obviously are like wires, and of course there's layers, and of course there's capacitance layers and inductance layers and all this other stuff that's going on down there that's inhibiting the flow of current. So there'll be more to it.
James,
yes.
James here. Neil, is that 180 degrees from the electric from the Atlantic trench that you say that that it's being separated from? Is that 180 degrees opposite of the Atlantic trench that you were talking about? There was lots of motion going.
Actually, I wasn't talking about that at all. In this video, which is as Bob had said, referencing work by Ben Davidson, there was a talk about where these poles are going to go, and apparently in his depiction, he thinks that they're going to meet somewhere in the Himalayan plateau. Poles, in my opinion, can't meet. However, if there is current coming from the top of that particular mountain, it will be attractive. And since it is the highest thing sticking towards the ionosphere and the highest point in the planet, in general, I could see that. I thought that would be an opposite to the South American anomaly of the magnetic field there. But I honestly do not know exactly what's happening, and I don't know where his information is coming from. I'm literally spitballing with you on this one. I don't want to give people the wrong impression. So. Go ahead, Bob. I'm sorry. Am I describing this right? Is that what the answer you're looking for?
No, you're describing it right. The only question that I'm really asking and trying to engage here is the question of is there a mantle effect that is still in place from the cataclysm in the poles? When the poles, so obviously, if we're talking about two electromagnetic bodies in space coming in near contact, there's going to be a magnetic effect. That is to say, 2 points of magnetism, one side and the other, the positive and negative, would have come into the conjoining at that point of the impact or the near impact. On the way there for that happening, did the mantle or the crust of the Earth, is there a grooving that these things are following because the electrical potential, just as you're saying, I actually agree now that you say this. Yeah, I mean, when you consider that this is the highest peak on Earth, right? Mm-hmm. Then this would also create the greatest level of attraction.
Yes.
And not only that, but it would have created, would it also create a pathway that the poles could be following again?
Well, the snow coming off the top of the darn stuff is a dusty plasma anyway. So to distribute charge from the Earth to the upper atmosphere, I don't think there would be a better spot. That said, one of the things that I'm thinking about when I look at this is that the movement of, for example, the jet stream across North America goes in one direction. That's a ring current. It's getting weaker now and starting to lose cohesion. It's going up and down a lot more. Doing that because the magnetic field is losing cohesion, as we were talking about. It's not strong. So the ring current is weaker. And it's starting to wobble
because of the grand
around.
Solar minimum, I think.
Exactly. And the South Pole has the exact same one going in the opposite direction. Now, if they're both happening on top of the Earth, I guarantee you they're hopping underneath the Earth as well. So there is a ring which they've detected. They think it's metal for some reason because they're idiots. I don't know. But there's a current going around where the jet stream is in the exact opposite direction, I think. So this is giving you the idea of what's happening at these poles. There's rings there. Now, as you know, if you turn up or turn down the current, these rings are going to go further north or further south, and they're going to wobble depending on what interference patterns they're dealing with and stuff. So given all of that, this is why I think we're going to watch it until it finally goes pop and just collapses, and then it's going to start right back up again in the opposite direction. And
that's at 40 degrees, I believe. Something with 40, 60.
I'm actually not sure exactly, but you're right. The 60 degree around the Arctic Circle, and of course it does drop down sometimes, as we know, with the jet stream and so forth. It goes right into, the middle of the United States sometimes. So.
James here. I happened just to notice that the South America Andes are really, really high.
Yes.
I mean, as far as the land mass on the south. And then it's kind of like...
we have an anomaly there, too.
It's kitty-quartered 180 degrees away from the Himalayas there.
And on the other side of the planet as well. But the Himalayas here, and of course the mountain range, the Alps, and all of that basically being like You think of it as a positive firm stream right here, I guess, where mountains get laid down. Well, over here, you're absolutely right. There's mountains clearly down here too, which, and of course, the plateau of Australia is fairly high, but they have to deal with the fact that there's a lot less land mass down there than there is.
Speaking of the Andes, sorry, Neil. Speaking of the Andes, I was watching a video the other day, a couple days ago, that was speaking of Teotihuacan and places like that are up 16,000 feet. They were at 3,500 feet in the ancient past. Now they're at 16,000 feet. And this is just a recent movement, apparently.
Actually, I don't know that, but I didn't know that. Did they have a reasoning behind this? Was it a theological or?
There was a massive uplift.
Okay.
At one point,
that wouldn't surprise me.
Yeah.
There's oral traditions about that as well. Very clear oral traditions about.
Yeah, and this is what they were basing that information off of in that video. Yeah.
That's very strange. I wonder if it had to do with the water rebalancing, so to speak. I mean, if you think about it, because if the water had to rebalance around the equator, for example, and where the exclamation mark is right now, the asterisk, well, that South America itself would be literally all of this water might actually push down a particular point over here and push up down there because of a weak point or something. It wouldn't surprise me, is what I'm saying. I mean, water.
Yeah, Brazil has had an inner sea too. It was the whole continent was
Lake Titicaca?
Not as high.
Well, the South American Codex talk about the water sweeping over the whole South American continent, not just little places over the edge of the water.
No, I wasn't referring to that. I meant after the water settled. So once the water balanced, it would be a lot heavier on the equator of the planet, is what I meant, than it was before. So because of literally millions of tons of water, billions even, it might go, oh, well, I'm just going to sort of squeeze in here. I'm going to let it out down here, down the south, just slightly. It wouldn't take much, like a 1.01 of a degree, but that's all it would take to raise that thing 6,000 feet in the air,
Right, yeah.
I mean, the Earth is really smooth.
Natural forces are amazing.
If it was a marble, it would be like glass. The Earth would be just a glass. It would be so smooth. You wouldn't be able to feel the Himalayas with your thumb. But we overemphasize that stuff because we think it's, oh my God, but it's only 8 miles. Big freaking deal. I mean, the planet's 40,000 kilometers around.
Yeah, I can walk 8 miles in a day, no problem.
Not straight up, you can't.
Yeah, not straight up.
No, not straight up, no.
Anyway,
I need an elevator for that.
Yes, well, yeah, I'll be the guy with the helicopter just landing on the top. Okay, I'm here. Thank you. I'll eat a sandwich. Bye. Sorry, I'm not going to die. I'm not that motivated. I'm going to die on this rock.
Helis can't get up there, my friend. The air is too thin.
You say that, I'd make it happen. Tesla will do it. We'll just do the thing. We'll just land on top of the UFO. Get out, say, welcome from the electric universe. They go, how'd you guys get here? It goes, UFO. See you later.
Speaking of Tesla and anti-gravity, they figured it out, him and T. Townsend Brown, and they've been working on it for a long time now.
Well,
and we could actually take an anti-gravity elevator up there.
Robert, you were talking about stuff like this when I came on. I didn't know, I thought we were going to do lots of geology. When I saw you started talking about that, I was like, huh? What? I mean, you were talking about UFOs and electrogravitics and stuff like that.
I consider myself a Renaissance man, if you will. I study and look at multiple topics. Yeah, and so I was surprised. It was interesting. I was listening to Electric Universe yesterday on the Greg J channel.
Oh yes, love that guy. Love them all.
And he even talks about some things that I was surprised to hear him talk about. But the thing that we have to understand about the whole extraterrestrial question is that I'm almost certain that it's all completely and totally integrated into the complete story of what's going on our planet. I put out videos and I've talked about this. I'm a firm believer that the Bible has a lot of truth in it, but it's out of order and it's misunderstood. So I've said in the past that I believe that the Tower of Babel story is the Atlantis story. Whether Atlantis was an actual city or whether it was a civilization is sort of immaterial to it.
Mm-hmm.
They're describing in the Tower of Babel the same thing that Solon is describing in this advanced civilization.
Yes,
right?
I would agree.
And that, yeah, and then when they talk about it being a global civilization, right? Because man was across the earth, and we have nothing in our lexicon to explain what that would mean in a bigger context. I'm a big fan of Timothy Alberino at Gen 6 Productions, and he did this great video on Genesis 1:1 and Genesis 1:2. And Genesis 1:2, in the original Greek version of the Septuagint, he makes a very clear point. If you use the correct rules for, I'm going to use the wrong word here. I want to say Hebrew, but in any case, that's probably right. The first letter should have started not with and the earth was without form. It should have started with but the earth was without form. And when you look at it from that standpoint, he argues that in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. That's just one thing to tell you how we got here. That's just a statement of how we got here. The second statement, but the earth was without form, is describing a post-cataclysm earth. And if you then look at it from
maybe
that
the
standpoint,
word wasn't form. See, when I think about things like this, I think about translations. And one of the things,
yes,
the words without form could be structure, which could be order.
Yes, there you go. And
so
when
it
he
was
laid
without,
that out
or it
for
was
me,
chaotic.
That makes a lot of sense. Yes,
and that wouldn't surprise me. You just basically described a giant garden place, and then of course a disaster, and then that type of thing.
Yeah,
anyway,
and then people fighting for survival.
You're getting the idea, yeah.
Yeah, no, and it all, I'm a big believer that in the end, it will all make sense if we have the right starting point for what occurred. And some of it means that we have to accept that there are some scary things to tell people about. It very well could be that these beings literally cataclysmed the planet. It may not just be some natural manifestation of an accident, that there may be something to the evolution of mankind, which first required a devolution of mankind, which is the argument that Peter Levenda and Tom DeLonge are making in their books called God's Man in War. Peter has made the argument that we are being devolved to show us what we didn't see. And in that, devolution would have been cataclysms. The first one being the Venus cataclysm, and then the second one being the Utnapishtim flood, both of which make sense as a reset button, if you will.
Okay, I see what
well,
you
we
mean.
know that there were 3 cataclysms: the Solon event with Plato, or Plato. The Egyptians say that there were 2 events before the one event that Solon described to the Egyptian priests.
Right. Yeah, I think man's life and history on the planet is much older than people know. Much, much older.
Oh,
it's very possible that the age
older
of dinosaurs
and stranger.
is not as old and much stranger. Yeah.
Well, I just think about, I know this is so strange, but when I think about some of the video games that I've seen and stuff like that over the time, because we're talking about catastrophes, I keep thinking about the game Fallout and stuff like that. But one of the things in that is that there's a religion forming around nuclear bombs. In that it's called Adam, and they're worshiping Adam. They're worshiping the power of these bombs that destroyed everything, and that we must become one with that. And they obviously are very fanatical. But the issue becomes what would we think if we were traumatized by this kind of stuff? How would we pick our society back up? What structures would we fall to? What we would look for sources of I guess, clarity or sense in such a chaotic world.
Yeah.
I have to say this. Apanatum.
Apanatum.
Yeah, well, you look into some of the Bible stories in the Old Testament. There's some very odd stories. For example, I'm going to get this wrong. I believe it's the story of Ezra. But there's a story about, and so here's an example that I look at as an example of an advanced consciousness understanding the nature of the quantum field, right, and understanding the nature of karma. So there's a story in the Bible where this gentleman and his wife, there's a famine going on, and he turns to his wife and he says, "Let us go down into Egypt, and I will tell the Pharaoh that I am your brother and that he should marry you, and then we'll let him take care of us." So they go down there. He passes his wife off as, he passes his wife off as his sister, and then the Pharaoh starts to realize that bad things are happening around him, and he's going, "What did I do? Why is this happening?" And then suddenly he realizes that he was tricked into marrying this guy's wife. And so he's committing a sin, if you will. And this is changing his interaction in the quantum field. And so watch what happens. If someone did this to you, right, and you were Pharaoh, you'd probably just kill him, right, and be done with the whole thing.
Right.
Except instead, he gives them thousands of calves and thousands of camels and, all these things and says, "Please take all of this and just go."
Right.
Well, that's an example of someone treating the quantum field differently, right? They had a good thing going there because nobody was being forced to serve them. That's the key. They passed themselves off as little g gods, which is what Peter Levenda and Tom DeLonge are saying happened, that these beings were treating us as slaves, right? But understanding the nature of the quantum field, they kept us just smart enough to do the work and then just dumb enough that we never questioned our servitude.
There does seem to be a separation between two individual people that we were trying to imitate them. The question becomes, were they extraterrestrial? Were they just people from before? Like if you had cybernetic enhancements and you went back 100 years, let's just say that alone. Let's imagine 50 years from now we have cybernetic advancements, and you go back 150 years, okay, in time. What in God's name would they think of you? Would they imitate you? Would you happen to have a larger head and larger eyes because you've been biologically designed to be different? You're just a member of this society. It's just what people did. It's just like a fashion statement. No big deal. Stop worrying about it. But to them, you're a god. You're right. And because you're so smart, and it's like, I'm not smart. I just went to school. I just went to,
exactly.
That's how you'd think of it. I mean, if I had just me and a cell phone in the past, what could I do with it? There's an entire movie about that. I think it's Iron Skies, where the Nazis eventually invade Earth from the moon because, well, some guy brought an iPhone, and now they have all the computing power they need.
No, it's all a really interesting question. So the history of our planet is much more mysterious, and we discussed this early on. So sort of, what brings me to the electric universe and such, and it was that I was writing a book I was going to track the economic collapse, and I realized about 6 months into writing my book that what was really going on wasn't just about the economic collapse, it was about disclosure of the extraterrestrial question. And I realized that it didn't necessarily have to do with the government deciding to do this, that there's other forces that are operating on our planet for our benefit and not for our benefit. That there may be a bigger story going on around us than most of us really know and understand. And Tom DeLonge and his group is just one portion of what's going on. And oddly enough, I was surprised. Peter Levenda, who's the author of God's Man in War, he wrote a research journal that you could buy when Gods came out. I happened to buy the research journal that itself. I'm paging through the research journal, and what do you think I find but an entry that says Plasma Universe, and it's got a picture of the Stone Man, of a Stick Man, of the Squat Man.
That's awesome.
I went, oh, what? Well, here you go. there's your connection. It's that, whatever's happened with the extraterrestrial question also has to do with exposing us to this electric universe model, that they're tied together. I've been thinking about putting a video together on that subject because I think it's important.
It's one of the easier
or is
ways.
it conscious?
Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
Sorry, Neil. Or is it that consciousness is leading us in this direction, and the gods were the planets, and we're picking up on this consciousness of God that is leading us in a certain direction.
But also, we have to understand that maybe somebody who's a snake oil salesman, and I'm not saying that there is any here in this particular environment, is trying to sell you a bag of goods to make you think, because if you take away, if you put the gods into space, you take away that sort of personal power trip that your mind goes on with your ego as you explore these things, when you say, you're wrong, I'm right, proving that you guys are lying to us. The moment you start that sort of, you want to keep people in that encapsulated little bubble.
Exactly.
Because that's a method of control itself, because you keep clicking.
Yep.
And you keep buying their shit. So
and you're going back, asking questions and wanting answers and not getting them, and next week paying some more money.
Exactly. We obviously, our goal is not to have that occur. So we don't want that to be the issue. But there are points where there might be more to it than that, because clearly we can't say that there wasn't beings on any other of the planets in this system prior to some of these events, and we don't know what happened to them. We don't know if they landed in our oceans. We don't know any of this. And of course, going with the intractable common descent theory, will never ever answer that, because it's presupposed to be wrong, if you know what I mean. Because you can only have one common ancestor.
We can't rule out that these ET stories may be perfectly lined up for certain peoples to use as a way to cover, again, T. Townsend Brown and Tesla's work on anti-gravity.
Makes things about this incredibly problematic, because by moving ETs to plasma events, natural or otherwise, but obviously having some quote-unquote lifelike qualities that we cannot understand, not unlike gods of the past, then capriciousness, then we're going to be in a situation where we could be duped into something on that. However, the trouble is we really don't know. There could be, you're about electrogravitics, we know that there are situations where the technology of the ancients seems to be
more
real.
Advanced.
No, well, at least they made use of something in their world that was different. They lived in a different electrical environment, so we don't know exactly what they're playing in. I have to, literally, I'm going to do a whole thing on this. I swear to God, that's my next special right there. I'm going to do a whole thing on explaining how things change. But still, about materials. But like I said, we don't know exactly what the electrical environment was. Like a computer today wouldn't work then because it would short, because the atmospheric electricity was too high. We'd have to build the pieces further apart because the electric field on each wire would be larger.
Or insulate them.
You're getting the idea. It would be inadequate for that environment, but it would also be inadequate to use in a thunderstorm, and that's the same type of environment. There could be more electrical activity, therefore you have to use more shielding and more and so how would you build then if something was 1,000 times worse? Like, how would you live on Earth? What would you do? What would be a wire? And piezoelectricity comes to mind with those singing rocks and things like that, because people talk about that all the time. Crystals are real things to people that they would have heard vibrating, and take them out, put them in a clasp and hold them on their neck, and they're like, hey, listen to this. Oh yeah, look, mine makes this sound. That's cool. It'd be real to them. Parts of the gods
James,
would be real, is what I'm saying. It'd be right in your face.
I think what we're going to see. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Your machines would have to have these variable volume. You could change the everything, how like how your radio scope and how everything.
I think that's how they fix
amount
people
of electricity
too.
And every variable you could think of, including the ability of the metal to be used as a wire, and everything would have to be. You would be lucky if you got a machine that would still work.
Exactly, and besides, they would turn into rock after a while. I mean, just sitting there on the ground. I mean, just over time. I mean, if I had a car sitting beside the pyramid, and I left for 10,000 years and came back, there would be a small rock sitting beside the pyramid. That's it. There'd be nothing left, and the pyramid would be sitting there going, "Stop," because it's built to last. So anyway, go ahead, Robert. Sorry.
No, I was just saying quickly that there are kind of like machine-like stones around the temples.
I've noticed that.
Just saying.
No, I have noticed that as well. That's kind of my implication, but I didn't want to outright say it. So.
Well, and one of the things that we don't know, we would have much more perspective on this entire thing if once the Spanish got to Central America, they didn't strip all the metal from everything, right? So if we had an opportunity to look at these obelisks and these temples, right? If the metal were still there, we would have a better idea of how these things were interconnected and how this machine, because I believe it was a machine, I believe that the pyramids were a machine. We would have a better idea of how these machines worked. But eventually, when something breaks down, right? Well, you take all the shiny stuff out of it. There's no reason to leave it in there.
Why? Exactly. Why would you?
Yeah, why would you? It isn't even that it would happen in the first 100 years or even 500 years, but eventually the sacredness of the technology would be gone.
Well, somebody would move in who didn't give a shit. You're right. Like, I mean, just be honest. I mean, and there was nothing to say. To be perfectly honest, sometimes they had no idea. I mean, literally, the Spanish came in and went, "Hey guys, let's build a cathedral up there." Turns out they built it on top of a pyramid. They didn't realize it. So, they had no idea what they did. And that type of thing just tells you an example of the scale of faith, if you know what I mean. Like, we'll build a cathedral and it will look out over everything and they will think we are magnificent. And they're like, you know what you're sitting on, right?
Yeah, no, and it's, I don't think necessarily that the extraterrestrial question and the electric universe are disparately separate issues to be discussed. Because if the universe is electric, then it would explain when people go, well, how did they get here? Well, I don't know. Let's see if we can figure out using an electric model.
Yeah, I'm with you on that.
I do not discount the possibility of there being ETs, but I think it's a really, really problematic thing to move faster than light through space when there's all kinds of house-sized rocks floating through there, and I think it's problematic. I mean, I could see slow progression of a civilization into the next star, to the next star, to the next star over a long period of time, that kind of expansion, but faster than light, I'm not sure that's possible.
Well, so two things. One, when we look at leaks, if you will, and I'm always skeptical of leaks, but you have to make things make sense. So this is going to get real deep, and pre-call we discussed this a bit, but just kind of think about this and just roll it around in your mouth and what it might mean potentially.
We like deep.
So people argue that the Earth is flat, and I would argue that it isn't that the Earth is flat; it's that everything is flat, and it isn't that we experience it as flat. People go, Bob, I can see the Earth, I can see the arc, we have pictures of other planets. No, I get it, I get it, but hear me out. If the universe is electric, then that means you have a positive electric pole and you have a negative electric pole, and that's it. You only have 2 points of reference, which means that everything in itself is flat. Our consciousness is electromagnetic, and reality is drawn into existence around us by our electromagnetic consciousness. when we observe things, things become three-dimensional. So when somebody says, Bob, the Earth isn't flat, we looked at it and it's round. Well, I know you looked at it and it's round. When you looked at it, you collapsed the wave function and you created the three-dimensional existence of a planet. If the fundamental nature of the universe is electric and is flat, then you span large distances by folding space, and you can fold space because it's flat. And that would explain how you cover long distances in a short period of time. You can't do that in three-dimensional space because you can't fold three-dimensional space. It's just a theory on how the universe exists. And again, I'm only trying to connect ideas and understand what's going on.
Bravo.
Oh, I
Do I
understand.
think that
Brilliant.
the universe is actually flat? Do I think we're going to fall off the edge of it? No, that's absolutely nuts.
No, I
When
understand.
you
As a
observe
mental
it-
concept, you're absolutely right. You're trying to deconstruct something and put it into a
Yes.
rational, something that could be understood. In my mind, immediately when I see the 2 points, I think about what's his name, Eric Lathwaite, who talked about the gyroscopic nature of electricity and magnetism, where if you, for example, if you have two transformers beside each other, they will affect each other, but only if they're in the same plane. If you turn one at 90
Right.
degrees to the other, it becomes invisible. And electromagnetism works on planes. Like you basically, it's the amount of lines of force that go through a ring that will generate current in that ring. It is, so it becomes, but only on that flux. So it only has to do with that field. And I've seen this happen to many people where they don't understand this, and like they hold a magnet near the edge of something, and they look, the eddy currents are slowing down, but there's way more Teslas in the middle of this magnet. I go, yeah, but you're not crossing anything because they're coming out of the pole in the middle. So you're not actually crossing any field lines. And trying to explain that is because it's planar. So in this sense, from point A to point B, from wherever the spark of the universe occurs to the other end of it, whatever that is, there are interactions that are only along that plane, and that's from point A to point B. And then because of that, the three-dimensionality of it becomes induced by the magnetic field.
Yes.
And that,
So
and of course,
that's
how that happens. So that in that sense, you're not wrong. If you get my meaning, like in a sense, when I see it that way, there's something to your words. You might not see it the same way I do, but that gives you another step, another point of view.
Right, and that's what I'm looking for. I'm at any given point, I'm looking to take the existing data that I have, and I'm trying to understand how it fits into the single model of the theory of everything, if you will, right? And so, if the universe is electric and if consciousness is electromagnetic, right? Then you have the merger of the two together, and you create a single unified theory about how the universe exists. If we didn't exist, the universe wouldn't exist.
I would just like to add quickly to James. We're not going to get very far if we don't deprogram ourselves from this materialistic philosophy that says that everything is dead and everything is unconscious and everything's solid, and the bonds that we know don't exist, they're going to pretend that they exist. We're not going to get anywhere. And so we need to, do the mantra that we're alive, conscious, and charged. Otherwise, we're not going to change very much. Just say.
Well, I think
Right.
that's
Right.
adopting
Guys,
their point of view. The ancients, I meant. Sorry, go ahead, Robert. Bob.
Right. Oh, no. I was just I want to thank Robert for inviting me on the call, and Neil and everybody else here for facilitating me. I promised my wife that I would spend the remaining of the evening with her because I love her dearly, and that's very true.
I completely understand.
But I am going to
sir.
hop off here at 2 hours. And it's always an amazing conversation. And if it's possible, I'd like to join you guys, not as the host, but as a guest.
Absolutely.
You're always,
ask questions of all of you.
I'm gonna go through and actually purge some of the people off the list here because we're approaching our max limit. But you are more than welcome to pop on any time. Speaking of people who pop on any time, is that Dave I see that just popped on?
Amazing
Electric Universe Eyes,
and that's what we desire. So Thank you so much for giving us such great food for thought, and it's a pleasure to chat with you, and you know, iron sharpens iron, so we challenge each other, but you know, the interesting thing is we all come from a different place and we all bring something different to the table, and many of us have, you know, some people have been doing this for a long time, and so it's always important to have new blood and new ideas, and you bring that. So I'm thankful again for the brain candy, and I have to also run. So
well, I think we'll wrap it up then. It's just been fantastic having you on, and I'm glad that your ideas are well. This is what it's all about, to understand how we got to this point. And I know that we're going to talk about landscapes, because the first thing I saw was that's what Robert said. Oh no, look at this stuff, and I was like looking. Oh yeah, I've seen him before. I didn't know that he was at this point though. You know, like, I mean, I see people posting, right, and I see your name, but I didn't see like, here's a full post, here's a whole new thing. So I was like, oh okay. And then he goes, I invited him on. I was like, great. You know, like, so I'm fantastic you came on, and I'm glad that we could accommodate it. We started a little bit later, and I'm sorry for the mix-up, but still, it was great having you here.
No, it's been a wonderful afternoon, and thank you very much, everybody, for taking the time to just explore some new ideas. I know that, to me, the most important thing is that we begin a conversation where we explore ideas, we set our ego aside, and we go, what can we say for sure that we know? And in this group, what's amazing is we all go, well, I know the universe is electric, and I know something's going on. And that is a very unique and a very small club, and I'm very happy and I'm very blessed that I'm a part of that club.
Well, we also have a Discord that you can come to as well if you'd like.
Yeah, well, they chat on that all the time. There's like 200 people there now. Jeez.
Yeah, it's getting up there, 260, something like that.
Because they just love it. I mean, you can also type and chat, like, and link things, like, and it's like a sort of a flow conversation. So
and you can voice chat as well. I mean, you can post videos, you can post PDFs, you can do everything in there.
Anyway,
I will.
It's been fantastic. I thank you so much for being here.
Yes, and thank you guys very much. You guys have a wonderful evening, and I'll see you on Facebook and on the blogs.
Take care, my friend.
Thanks for coming.
All right. Peace, everybody.
That was fantastic.
Oh, that's a great show. Oh, sorry, Neil.
No, it's cool. I just couldn't believe it.